The death toll in that Israeli strike on the Rafah refugee camp stands at 45 people killed in an Israeli airstrike. The Israel Defense Force said it had killed 2 senior Hamas leaders, but it was investigating the circumstances of the deaths of civilians in the area. Benjamin Netanyahu called it a mistake. He called it a tragedy. It comes just a few days after the South African International Relations Department hailed a ruling by the International Court of Justice ordering Israel to halt military assaults in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Zane Dangor is the Director General of the Department of International Relations. Zane, let's talk about the ruling on Friday first. Your thoughts in the ICJ essentially calling for a ceasefire in Gaza at the moment.
Yes, and the ICJ legally can't use the term ceasefire. You can use it when 2 state parties are involved, but given that one is not a state party, they have to use the term ending military operations. And they actually ordered Israel, which is the major belligerent and the state with a standing army, to do exactly that. We did ask for the language to be a lot more specific because we didn't want Israel to do what they did with the previous provisional orders, to try and interpret it in a way that will allow them to continue the massacres and the genocide. And the court was very specific this time.
But the ICJ has made similar rulings before, particularly with Russia's military offensive into Ukraine. In that case, calling for a cease of military operations. Russia has largely ignored that. What's to say that Israel will adhere to an ICJ ruling?
So Russia-Ukraine is 2 states, right? And that's why they will use the term ceasefire. And both the NATO forces and Russia have completely ignored that. And that's partly why we've been continuously saying talks, but the ceasefire is advanced to the ICJ isn't just a political issue. It must be done on principle. But we've seen that Israel has been dealing with issues of impunity for years. It's institutionalized impunity. They've ignored previous ICJ orders and the whole opinion to stop building what is called the apartheid wall. The Security Council resolutions, which are binding, for example, the Ramadan ceasefire was not adhered to. But this is a pattern over at least 50 years of disregarding international law because they feel they are the exception to international law. And the thing is, they do that because they're right. They know they can get away with it.
Where do you see the changing, particularly diplomatic language on countries who were previously critical of South Africa's case before the ICJ? Joe Biden telling Israel to protect civilians after this Rafah strike. France's Emmanuel Macron also coming out quite strongly against 45 people being killed. Do you note a change in diplomatic language since the ICJ ruling on Friday?
Look, we've been noting a change in diplomatic language incrementally as what we predicted even with our first application to the ICC took place, that this is systemic. The issues of intent are ever present, so it is genocide, aside from the war crimes issues. Then, for example, people were saying, how dare you say genocide? But people are beginning to become alive to the issues that we predicted. We're saying that this is systemic, it's part of an intent, it's part of a bigger plan to depopulate Gaza, and that's coming, you can see the facts now. And that's partly, why there's a change in attitude, because they thought they could get Netanyahu to act in a way that would be less belligerent, but that hasn't come to the fore. The attacks have intensified immediately after the ICJ ruling on Friday. The attacks intensified on that particular day, and that is it's a message to the world: nothing can stop us, which is something which senior leaders have said before. Nothing and no one will stop us. So I do think there's a fatigue with Israel by many Western leaders, and I see the EU foreign ministers have now decided to pursue sanctions. We don't know what kind of sanctions that is, but it's a good sign.
Zane, the rocket strike on Rafah came as in the wake of Hamas rocket attacks directed towards Tel Aviv. The scale of damage not anywhere close to what we've seen in Rafah. But if we're talking about ceasefire and halting military activities, would you call it upon both sides in this current conflict that instead of sending rockets retaliatory or offensively to seek a end in hostilities from both sides, Zane?
Well, end in hostilities means everybody must silence their guns, right? The kind of resistance attacks is not helping. It's not going to make a difference. Like one can understand it, but it's not going to make a difference. All it does, it gives the cover and excuse for Israel to do what it does. So it's not advancing the liberation movement. So from a strategic perspective, it must stop, but from a legal perspective, it must stop as well.
Zane Dangor, really appreciate your time, International Relations Director General.